Well, I tell you what, hey, we're on episode 33 of theChurch.digital, and we've got a special treat for you. And I've not even said this publicly. I've never told this story before publicly. So listening audience, you are the first one to hear this. So I was at the Church IT Network conference a couple weeks ago, spoke and helped them coordinate a lot of the breakout sessions. And it was a lot of fun and really got to just love on and encourage a lot of the online ministers and online pastors that are out there at the churches doing things week in and week out. One of the sessions that I had, scheduled myself to teach was this idea of merging church online and micro locations. And if you listen to my podcast, you know that we talk about micro locations all the time. So have a talk. I've written blogs about it. I've written ebooks on it. Like that's just one of my sweet spots. Then I find out they were very excited to tell me that Rob Wegner was going to be one of the keynote speakers for the conference. Now, if you don't know Rob is part of this underground movement of churches. There's KC Underground, which Rob has been very passionate about working with and helping this, not a service-oriented, but a discipleship-oriented movement of church happening in the Kansas City area, which is actually spawned off other locations. I know Tampa Underground is existing and is going very strong. And there's even talks of starting to do something here in the Miami area. Oops, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But it's been really fun to see this idea of underground church, of a house church, of a micro location, of a family being passionate about reaching into their community on their own and empowering these people to do this level of discipleship. And so I was scheduled to talk about house church and micro location, but instead I'm like, I would rather listen to this guy, Rob Wegner, over here talk about it. So I'm not going to do my talk because I just want to listen to him, the expert, the guy who's really doing this, go into detail. And so it was a phenomenal panel. We had some others on there. Rob was very humble to jump in here and the others as well. But we painted a picture of what it means to move away from a service-oriented discipleship structure and instead move towards a discipleship structure where we empower people, where we make disciples, where we empower others in sharing their faith and discipling them to a greater understanding of who God is and what God has for them. And I'll tell you, at the end, I think the audience had a far greater understanding of how the micro locations worked and how just possibly the church of today can exist and help build these micro locations around through church online. So here's what we've got. We had a panel set up. Of course, Rob Wegner from KC Underground mentioned that earlier is there. We brought in Brian Phipps to the conversation. He is with an organization called Disciples Made. It's their discipleship pathway that really ties in with the KC Underground movement. And just that both of those guys are phenomenal. We brought in Tyler Sampson from Church Anywhere. Once again, no stranger to this podcast. It seems like every time we're talking micro locations and church online, I'm mentioning Tyler Sansom's name. And then we brought in Jason Morris, who also is from the Kansas City area, who has a long history with doing micro locations, especially in context with his church, Westside Family. Okay, so I want to apologize here. The recording of this, the audio quality, isn't the best compared to what we normally have. The fidelity just is off. The main device we were using, long story short, didn't work, and so we had to fall back on a backup, which didn't have as crisp a recording. The content, what we're discussing, the messaging here, honestly is one of the better podcasts that we've created to date. And so I present to you Rob Wegner, KC Underground, Brian Phipps, Disciples Made, Tyler Sampson, Church Anywhere, Jason Morris, Westside Family, and myself, Jeff from theChurch.digital, having a conversation, micro locations and church online. Hey, everybody, here you go.
My name is Tyler Sansom. I work at a church in Corydon, Indiana called First Capital Christian Church, and we do a ministry called Church Anywhere. 12 seconds.
That was awesome. Right? Well done. Yes, sir.
Awesome. Brian Phipps. I've been in Kansas City for about 10 years, pastor for about 25 years. The last 10 was at Westside Family Church, where I was the Next Steps pastor, disciple-making structures, developed some structures that got more result than we ever thought. Short version, became a thing, stepped out to do that about a year and a half ago. It's called Disciples Made, and we deliver online technology and coaching to implement it well.
I'm Rob Wegner. I was on staff at a church plant in Granger, Indiana, which is near South Bend. Was there for almost 25 years. And then about 5.5 years ago, moved here to Kansas City. I was also on staff at Westside Family Church with these guys. Last year, I've been a part of founding something called the Kansas City Underground, which is a network of missional leaders, disciple makers and microchurches in Kansas City, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
I'm Jason Morris, Global Innovation Pastor of Westside Family Church, overseeing the digital expression of Westside to catalyze church planting movements globally around the world and microsites wherever they happen to be.
Awesome. So a lot of what we're talking about, hopefully talking about, is how this idea of a church online can connect with and start a micro location or a physical location around. And so there's a difference between a campus, a multi-site campus, and then like a micro or a house church or a watch party. And through churches around America, the ones that are doing it, like they use different terms of what those smaller locations are. I'd love to maybe just pick apart here a little bit. Casey Underground, like what does expression of church look like? Church Anywhere, what does that micro expression of church, what does it tangibly look like?
For us, when we talk about a microchurch, our one sentence definition is it's an extended spiritual family that's led by ordinary people. The goal is to live in everyday gospel community, and they own the mission of Jesus in a particular network or neighborhood. So to break down a little bit, for us, microchurch is a missionary endeavor. So we're not like organizing people that already go to churches into groups. There's like an assimilation strategy. Usually it's a couple or people partnering as what we call a missional team that feel called to a certain context. So sometimes it's a neighborhood. Sometimes it might be a people group, like there's Algerian refugees that are in Olathe, which is about 25 minutes from here. Like one of our microchurches is among Algerian refugees. We have others that are embedded into the youth rodeo circuit of Kansas, for example, or a travel baseball league. One of them has even become a for-profit business in Bonner. So there's different contexts, but you've got people making new disciples. And as you multiply disciples, we believe that's when you have the church. And the church, its most fundamental level, is an extended spiritual family. And then the goal is not a meeting. So a lot of times house churches, for example, it's people trying to take what is typically done in a weekend service inside of a big box somewhere, and they just do it in somebody's living room. Now, I'm all for that, but the goal for us is actually a community on mission, living into the gospel as a community, not meeting weekly. Are there weekly meetings? Absolutely, but there's so many different touches between the meetings, and then they're owning the mission of Jesus in a particular neighborhood or network. So there's a very like fiercely local focus on owning the mission of Jesus. We're in a subdivision called City View Farms. And so our microchurch is owning the mission of Jesus in about a 2 to 3 block radius of that neighborhood. And our microchurches have that kind of mission specificity. Because if you're going to actually live like a great missionary, you can't do that very well in multiple contexts. Like you have to kind of pick a primary where you drop down deep and really live out the missionary rhythm. So that's what a microchurch is for us. And then we have different rhythms. We have what we call 2 out, 2 up, 2 in. So 2 out is about once a month. One of your outs is going to be some kind of socially inclusive party. Another one's going to be serve oriented. The 2 up is within your extended spiritual family. You have like an immediate spiritual family. That's your missional team that's owning the mission with you. You want to be meeting with them at least twice a month. And that's orbiting around a meal, a discovery Bible study, prayer, planning for mission, and then 2 in. And the 2 in is underneath all these microchurches, we have what we call a hub. And the hub is the mission agency that trains the missionaries in the microchurches. So we have 7 equipping teams in a hub, and those provide all the services needed to launch and sustain and coach and multiply microchurches. So we're saying at least twice a month you want to be connecting with your hub. So you're not some disconnected sort of cancerous cell that's reproducing out there, that you're under governance and you're being coached and supported. So does that get at it?
Oh yeah, I mean that was pretty rich right there.
That's
Is everybody taking notes on that? That was pretty. What's interesting, I don't want to like go down this rabbit trail, but like there was a really thick strategy there in context of what perception on the outside might actually be. It's very organic, and so it's a really interesting tension of where you've got that hub. You've got, all these infrastructures and this plan in place. There's the 6, the ins and the outs, and I'm glad I got that recorded because I didn't write any of that down. But there is intentionality behind a lot of that, which just from the outside, man, I really appreciate that.
We're radically committed to like grassroots and kind of organic growth. But like if you have a garden and you have a tomato plant that's growing and you don't have some kind of structure to hold it up, it'll lay down on the ground and rot out and die.
Mhm.
And that's what happens with a lot of organic church stuff. It's like first generation, and then it tends to rot.
Mm.
So we're trying to create a structure to support that organic growth without controlling it or micromanaging it.
Awesome.
So Church Anywhere is a initiative-based microsite strategy that we have in our discipleship pathway. So when I say initiative-based, our goal would be to take someone from an unbeliever all the way to conversion, and then from conversion help them find their purpose that will eventually help people find and follow Jesus. So their purpose could be, I'll give you a real life example. A purpose where one of our Church Anywhere leaders was, she was exposed to some orphans in our area and fell in love with these orphans. So she felt like her purpose and passion was to go and help these orphans find and follow Jesus. So she has created a Church Anywhere location at a local orphanage that has resulted this year in 3 of those kids finding homes. So they do like a church service-ish with them. That's the technology piece of it, but we always train our leaders to say that relationships trump technology every single time. The main goal was to go out and build relationships. And at Spire conference, one of the keynote speakers mentioned us, and we had never thought of us in this context before, but it makes total sense. He said we're like the Dollar General of churches. Because we're rural, our main mission is to have people find their purpose and go out and serve underserved people. And so Dollar General thrives amongst people like Walmart and Target because they're serving the underserved. And so that's kind of who we are. We want to empower our people to go out and be pastors to the underserved by utilizing technology as the tool to get in that door.
That's awesome. The Dollar General.
Right.
Very, very
That's clever.
DollarGeneralChurch.com.
Right.
Jason, I don't have you for the slide. I didn't know you were coming, but maybe share a little bit. How does Westside treat micro?
Well, we have 2 flavors of small. One is our church planning movement that we have internationally, and those average 42, so that's relatively small. But we keep it small and reproducing on purpose. And it's a just full-blown church planning movement that gets empowered through a lot of tools technologically that help them get the job done. One of the cool things, just so that you know, just got back from India last week and was at the graduation at the Nalgonda group that KC Underground supported. In 18 months, now we have 80 new churches.
Wow.
So, and go God, and Enosh wanted to say thank you. So anyway, just
That's awesome. Praise God.
a lot of what we do is partner with other churches too, to create those linkages to people on the ground that are actually getting the work done and to help them to just multiply Jesus everywhere. That's one flavor of micrositing. Another flavor, that's really probably more church planning in a house church scenario, but we do a lot of online tools to empower that. In
That's
fact,
primarily global, right?
yes, globally. One of the neat things is that some of our global partners are now using the same online tools that I have used with them to further their efforts. Like Ed, for example, because you guys know who he is, was on a motorbike going to 3 different countries all the time, rarely ever home. Today, and I've got video of this, it's really cool, he's doing online church planning training with a Facebook group in his language, in Thai, with the church planners that are in Laos and Myanmar and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff, killer. Love that guy. So that's the flavor of micrositing as a church planner. The other flavor, which is a little bit in contrast to what you mentioned, was taking what we do online and giving it freely available to anyone who wanted to use it as a watch party or either online or on site in their neighborhood, wherever they happen to be. We have a microsite in France. We've got one in San Antonio. We've got one in Mexico now. There's a lot of different places that they somehow are connected or associated with Westside that love it so much that they don't have something like that where they ended up moving to or something like that. And so we just tell them, well, hey, we can help you be Westside wherever you are. And we call that Westside Anywhere. So we've even, messed around with the idea of, instead of calling it Westside Online, because online really doesn't mean anything anymore because everybody's online. It meant something 10 years ago when that was the differentiating factor, but today online, it doesn't really say much. But if you say Westside Anywhere, then that sparks a little bit of creativity in people to think, oh, I could have Westside in my home or in my neighborhood.
But what if I'm on the east side?
You're always on the west side of something. You're always on the west side of something. So anyway, those are the two flavors of micrositing that we do.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's hone in a little bit on this idea of in the global, the micro, the church planning, like that's awesome. But let's try to keep in
keep it
context, domestic.
Yeah. Sure.
That may trickle over international for this. So let's get practical here, whether online or physical. Like, let's define what a micro-location, a microsite is. Who are they? What are they doing? Where are they going to be? What are some examples of micro-locations that are around?
Ours are, because it's passion-based, because it's this initiative-based, they're all over the spectrum with the possibilities of what they could be. So, for example, there's a lady and her husband who are very passionate about special needs adults. They realize that the people that are not getting the attention are the workers. So the people that are driving these special needs adults around, they're caring for them. And so while the special needs adults hang out in one room of their house on Sunday nights, they do church together in the living room with the workers. So that's like one example of what a micro location is. So that's empowering two people from our church that said our passion is this, to become the pastors of House Church. Another example of that, though, is I shared this yesterday, but it's the coolest story ever. An inmate at one of our locations decided that after he found Christ, his passion is now to reach out to other people that were in his similar situation. So not necessarily just an inmate, but he's a convicted murderer. So he's serving 65 years. And he's like, guys, I love what you're doing, but you will never reach the hardcore people in this jail with like praise and worship music and a sermon. And so what he's decided to do is something that he's calling hardcore church. And so we helped him learn how to edit videos. So he's creating his own videos. He's using former gang members' testimonies, that kind of thing. And he's recruited like cell leaders. So he's got his own team working with the chaplain at the jail. And I went on Sunday to be there for him for that service on my way here. And they had like 307 inmates that were not the normal people we minister to in that jail. And can't stress that enough. Like they're not double dipping. There's 300 completely separate inmates. So for us, a micro location is empowering a normal person to lead a church that could be 15 people, it could be 300 people.
I would basically echo your answer. For us, a microchurch is, again, it's a spiritual extended family. It's led by ordinary people. And we wouldn't call it like a microsite per se, because again, we see it more as an extended spiritual family, but they would have locations that they're called to. Some examples that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, one of them, Chad and Allison Chambers, they've embedded into the youth rodeo circuit. These are kids that are, middle school, high school age, and every weekend there's a different rodeo, and there's about, a couple hundred families that are making this circuit. So they've started making disciples in that kind of traveling band of gypsies that follow the rodeo. And like 3 weeks ago, they had two women get baptized. Like they're leading people to Christ. Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And what happens is when they're at the rodeo now, they've had so many people come to faith that they actually have a public service. And they'll have more than 100 people who show up for that gathered service. But then outside of the rodeo, we also do what we call discovery Bible studies. So it's a very simple discovery-based way of engaging the Bible. So they'll spin out discovery Bible studies in the hometowns of the people that are a part of this larger microchurch as a way to multiply potential new microchurches. Another family, the Barnes, their kids are in a travel baseball league, and then their daughter's in a travel volleyball league. That's become kind of the feeder system for their microchurch, which is located in Piper, which is a rural community. And they've grown to where if they throw a party, they'll have 100 people show up. But within that, there's 6 or 7 families that kind of make up the core of their family. For us, a microchurch is you're going to have the presence of worship, community, and mission. And you need to have that that balance of all three in our mind for it to actually be a church. Like a guy who is passionate about the homeless, who's like feeding them and then reading verses and then kind of goes home. That's fantastic. It's not a church though, right? So when you have a community that's built around the person of Jesus, they're practicing community, mission, and worship. And for us, they also have to be willing to come under some kind of governance. Like for us, it's pretty simple. Jesus is the head of the church, amen? But then there's also elders and deacons, you know? So when they're connected to the hub, they're connected to a network of microchurches where there is that kind of governance, where they're going to experience the headship of Jesus through eldership and so forth.
A lot of what we're talking about, they're very so positive. You've got people, you got 6 or 7 families doing a thing connected to this sporting. Honestly, I've never thought of that. Gathering 100 people together, but having a core family of 6 or 7 that are in control of their own spiritual growth, spiritual development. A lot of times when talking with churches, there's an underlying negativity, maybe a perception when it comes to a house church, somebody that's kind of controlling their own spirituality, or, you know, they're so disgruntled with the big C church or a local church expression that they're kind of doing something on their own. What is that tension really like? Like, how do you answer some of those concerns, or what's your perception of reading of a situation of a family who arguably another church would look at it like, well, they're isolating themselves from being part of a larger community, instead doing this together in their own neighborhood?
Okay, for us, I think whenever there's any kind of movement, the first part of the movement is always reactionary. So like missional has been a movement in America for 15 years. So I do think early on there were a lot of people that were angry, and not unjustifiably so. There's probably some legitimate reasons for their anger. There's been a lot of like spiritual abuse and corruption, and we all can name one leader after another who built their brand around their personality and then it collapsed, and a lot of people have been hurt by that and disillusioned by that. But what I see a lot more of happening right now is actually like mature expressions of missional, like what's happening with Church Anywhere. Like the folks that are a part of the Kansas City Underground, many of them discovered this passion for mission in the context of the prevailing model. Like Westside was a fertile environment where they were learning how to become a disciple maker. They were experiencing missionary formation. They were growing as leaders, discovering their calling, leading this thing on mission. So when we launched out of Westside, it was actually a really positive experience in that a bunch of people who had been developed this way, now we're launching out a new expression of church that isn't just reaction against the old. It's more like an extension that in order for it to reach its full potential, it needed to break away from the prevailing model. So what we do to keep it from being reactionary or getting toxic is like we have like a orthodoxy kind of irreducible minimum that everybody agrees to, which is like the Apostles' Creed, the Lausanne Covenant, and then we have 18 values that are part of what it means to be the underground. The hub also provides like support and coaching and governance. We feel like, and I've been in the prevailing model in very successful churches for 25 years, like I feel like we have better eyes on and we're more informed about what's happening in our microchurches on a daily and weekly basis than most churches are about what's going on in their small groups. It's just true.
Agreed.
Like, and there's
Yeah, I can second that too. And I'm part of Westside, and my wife, she is a part of Underground, right? Because we have this, Westside is great. I often talk about it as it's a kingdom incubator.
Mhm.
You know, it allows for expressions of kingdom work to go beyond the 4 walls of Westside. You know, Disciples Made with you, great example. Underground's a great example. The point I'm trying to make is that my wife has been poured into. She told me this. She's like, I feel like I've been poured into more in the past year or two than I have in my entire life before.
Praise God.
That was the last piece I was going to say. He didn't say it, this phrase, but what gets elevated to this level and answers your question specifically is the level of soul care they provide to these folks. Because the folks that step out, if you step out angry, whether you step out angry to plant a church or you step out angry to start a microchurch, if you start out angry, you're going to end up shriveled. The antidote to that is meaningful soul care under the governance support of the elders and deacons, and you can't keep going in underground. You'll find your way out.
Yeah, in fact, every new microchurch leader goes through a really immersive assessment.
Yeah.
Where we're checking into like, how are you with your most important relationships, with your spiritual and emotional health, how are you actually doing financially? And then we do a really deep assessment on their calling. Everything from the GPS assessment we developed to Enneagram and Strength Finders and DISC. And every single microchurch leader gets like a personalized coaching plan that's like probably a year's worth of spiritual direction. And then we're meeting with them to kind of follow through on that. So all of that kind of stuff keeps it healthy, keeps it on mission and not reactive.
And there's I think if you're hearing a lot of this, it's like, whoa, that's a lot. And yes, that is true. And I also believe that because of the way that this is being approached, it is getting close to why you can take an ordinary person and release them into ministry is because of this backup stuff that you guys are doing. One of the prevailing statistics that gets talked about a lot is that the best way to get gospel saturation, have more people get baptized, more people come to Jesus, is new church plants. And I think that that's not necessarily causation, but a correlative stat, because I personally believe that the reason why people get saved and people get baptized and more people get saved and baptized in a new church plant is because the church planter was the only one that got really discipled. So if we were to really disciple to this level, everybody, what would happen? That would change the statistic.
Let me interject one thing, because we've used this word discipled, I don't know, a dozen times in the past 15 minutes. Discipled means 100 things to 80 different people. So let's actually define right now what discipleship means. Like our usage of using it, gentlemen, what is exactly discipleship?
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues is that disciple making, you're pointing at it lacks definition, and it lacks a definition that includes a motivation for people to want to be a part of it. And I believe that Jesus offers the most extraordinary invitation that's filled with motivation to be a disciple of his. It's in John 10:10. It's like, let's leave the stuff that's broken, that the thief killed, and destroyed, and let's walk into a fully alive life. Anybody at fully alive already?
That's it.
Anybody like to have a little bit more of that fully alive tomorrow? Yeah, and everybody in the world is saying the same thing. So if Jesus has that kind of invitation to being his disciple, come live fully alive and leave the brokenness of the thief, then what does that look like? And the Holy Spirit, I believe, is the source of transformation in a disciple's life. So we ought to ask the question, how does the Spirit then practically change the life of a person into a more fully alive life?
Amen.
And to me, yeah, I'm with you. Totally with you.
Preach!
Right? And so, I mean, you look at the scriptures and everything boils down to these two ideas. One, he's going to bear spiritual fruit in your life. If you're not more loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, self-controlled, faithful, whatever the other one is, if you're not that and you can parse Romans, you've missed the point. And we're not helping people cultivate that fruit. But a definition of a disciple is one who's becoming filled with the Spirit, evidence of the Spirit. And the other part of the Spirit's influence in our life is what the Bible calls spiritual gifts. You know, a lot of people try to take disciple making and boil it down. It's not what you're doing, it's who you're becoming. Or it's not just what you're becoming, it's what you're doing. It's 100% both of those things. And if we really aim at disciple making around those two things, we call them character, fruit of the Spirit, and then our personal calling, which is largely informed by the gifts of the Spirit, but there's more to a personal calling. What we found in our disciple making efforts is when we cultivated fruit and developed gifts, that created an impact in the people and then through the people that made people predisposed to doing the kind of activity that these folks are talking about. It's almost like it created a space for a new creativity, a new imagination about how they can be priests in their own pulpit, whether that's serving in the way they have, or the Algerian folks or whatever. I mean, the Spirit is infinitely creative in how he wants to get people. So, definition, character times calling equals impact. Motivation, intrinsically there. We were born to be people who are in relationship with people. And by the way, if you develop the fruit of the Spirit, your relationships get a whole lot better. How many of you would have better relationships with your kids if you were more patient, self-controlled, kind, gentle. How about with your spouse? I don't have to go far. It's like you want those relationships. And Jesus is saying the thief broke them, and I've come to fix them.
That's good.
All right? And then everybody's dying for the significance answer in their life. We talk about legacy. We talk about wanting to be an intimate part of whatever is good in the world. And if you've been given spiritual gifts from heaven that the Father says, I'll infuse with my power to go beyond what you can do on your own to make a difference, then why not sign up? And by the way, those two deep-seated passions of ours to become better people that have loving relationships and to be people of significance and influence are wired into our IT.
See what you did there.
See, I tried that.
Well
I'm a
done.
discipleship
Well
guy.
done.
I tried to go into your world. I stumbled, but let me pick myself back up here. God hard-coded into you at your creation those two desires. When he said, be fruitful and multiply, what does that take? Intimacy. How's it restored? Through the Spirit. And he's also hardwired into you the have dominion over my creation. It's right there in the creation mandate. Be fruitful and multiply and have dominion.
So we're going to go ahead and call the ushers forward. Pass the buckets.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Please, go ahead.
I'm going to bounce off of what he just said to answer this question. So for most of you in this room, you're not in the context of something like the underground. So you have a governing body over top of you. Very similar to my situation. We are a church, not like a movement. And so it's significantly harder to talk to leadership about the negative impacts of doing something like house church, because if you say, hey, let's have our people go be the church outside of the building, naturally the building's a lot more empty. And so church leadership across the country looks at that and says, like, are you crazy? Like, we're not going to let people not come to church.
Just hit the tension point.
Right, hit the tension point. But here's the shift though. Whenever you empower people to go be like Jesus, that's really attractive. And we've noticed, and it was a shock to us, but like when we got out of the mindset of everything's about us, I have this tattoo that says not the kingdom of Tyler. It's this constant reminder like, hey, it's not my kingdom. And so when we got out of the mindset of like, it's all about building this physical building of people in this church, I got 305 Oliver Street in Corydon, Indiana. Our people became so attractive because they're living like Jesus on mission and on purpose that our physical campus grew as well.
So wait a minute. Tyler, you're saying
I'm saying
that if people become
more like Jesus,
open-handed and generous, that God will give more.
Somebody probably taught that at some point. But the byproduct we thought with the negativity was actually a positive byproduct for us. So not only did these microsites grow, but then our community of believers that were not in microsites also began to grow because they saw our church going into the community, which is part of what we're called to do.
Another tension point that's like the numbers on the weekend is also giving. People that are concerned like, okay, the giving's going to just go to the wind. Like our experience in the underground, I have a very, very close friend. He's actually like my spiritual father who planted kind of a traditional model church at the same time as the underground. And if you would compare our giving, like our internal giving through the microchurches towards the hub to sustain everything is actually outpacing the giving that's coming in the weekend services in the traditional model. And he's up to 300 people a weekend. And so that's been an interesting sort of like experiment that we've been sort of running concurrently.
Sure, but the same logic applies. Whenever you're living on mission and on purpose, you're becoming a better disciple, which will lead to more generosity. Totally. It all comes full circle there, but we've somehow for a long time like kind of just stopped the ball from rolling and focused on butts and seats. So
it's true.
So what other tensions? Because we live in a world, and I put a slide up, USA Church is often driven by large buildings and butts and seats. I didn't know he was going to say that. He was already predestined. Is there a place for predestined? All right. Is there a place for microsites? Like how? So the goal of the people in here is that they're doing the large. We need to go from large to small. What tensions is an organization that's used to large going small? What tensions are they going to feel?
Well, I think Jason should probably jump in this one. I do, actually. I'm not staff at a large church anymore.
Yeah, I can tell you about, on a personal level, I can tell you about the tension in our family, because I'm a pastor of a large prevailing church with an online campus of thousands of people. And my wife really felt like helping out the underground. And so they're two different, and don't get me wrong, underground I think, has been launched from Westside. We call it divide and partner. The expression, in order for it to be what it needed to be, at some point when the teenager gets old enough, they need to leave the house.
Yeah.
It's not best to keep them cloistered in the basement. You got to launch them. And so that's what I feel like, Simple Church and KCN, all that stuff, and even with Disciples Made, at some point, you got to launch it for it to be what God wants it to be, because it's not our church, it's Jesus' church. So at the end of the day, the way that things happen is so radically different in the KC Underground context and everything that Maria was used to. It was major whiplash because she had to unlearn so many things in order to be able to even know how to function inside this environment, that it took a while.
She kept thinking I was the lead pastor.
Yeah.
We don't have any pastors. Like everybody who leads a microchurch is a pastor,
Right.
but we don't have pastors on staff.
Right.
Yeah. But probably the first 3 or 4 months, I had to correct her 4 or 5 times. Like, I'm not a lead pastor.
Well, see, and that actually surfaces one of the tensions is the confusion.
Yeah.
Because we tried to have Simple Church and KC Underground coexist inside the big box environment. And what we created was a lot of confusion for people.
Yeah.
Because the discipleship pathways were so radically different from one expression to the other. People were just confused and they didn't know what to do. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working well.
I can share another tension point as well when it comes to developing volunteers. Everybody has the scramble, even IT folks has the scramble to have enough volunteers to carry out the work on a given weekend. Like I was in charge of all the systems for first impressions, small groups and everything else. So we had our own roll call every week. And when we started developing our people, we realized that their personal calling actually led them out of our department. And I don't know about what you call it, but that's called customer acquisition. You paid a price to get those people in your department. And now you're going to send them off to the worship team, or God help us, the IT team, or, whatever else. And I can remember the very first time, my very first group discipling this way, where the guy, it was pretty evident, didn't really care as much about leading small groups as he cared about his microsite, which was investing in folks that were on the autism scale to help them find employment and to maintain employment. And he's changing the industry in that whole thing now. And I remember that tension point of asking, will I let them go into their personal calling out of my space, even if that makes me recruit more? And I answered that question quickly because God graciously gave me a conviction that it's about the people and not about me. Like, I need that tattoo.
I can give you one later.
Okay, that sounds Make sure he doesn't get my name. But that wasn't the case all the way around. When it came to opportunity for other folks in other departments to decide, well, do I let these people go? Then you've got that same tension point. Will I try to hold on to people, or will I release them to this? And that became a tension point.
Wow. The butts and seats model. The only answer I can give you to this, I don't know what else I could say beyond this, but we have brought more people into the kingdom and baptized more people at microsites this year than we have on site. So that's in grand scale of things that completely destroys that argument in my mind.
I think if your goal is actually gospel saturation, which to me is like every man, woman, boy, and girl being able to see, hear, and experience and respond to the gospel. Like the more, what do you call them, microchurches or microsites
or ministries or whatever.
Or ministries, it's like each time we're increasing the mission mosaic, right? They're like pieces of a mosaic.
Yeah.
And so if we want to actually see the entire metro Kansas City area in our case, it's like, well, we think it's going to take 20,000 microchurches because that would be about 100 people for every microchurch. And we think a healthy microchurch in its kind of what we call spheres of influence can touch and really be a gospel presence for about 100 people. Well, you can't do that from one location, even if it's core, which is amazing. And there's 19,000 people here, but it's still a drop in the bucket, right? And if we keep doing and trying to scale out this very expensive model where it requires buildings and lots of professional staff, it's like we're never going to scale out to gospel saturation. It's too expensive. There aren't enough high-level leaders who can manage the complexities of this thing. But when church is like 20 people in my neighborhood, and planning for mission is planning the next party and inviting 3 new neighbors, it's like, okay, millions of people can do that. And if discipleship, when we create robust experiences, but they're simple for an ordinary person to lead and replicate, like that's the game-changing stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful right there. Let me ask this question, because when you mentioned the story, or when Jason mentioned the story of his wife, and you said there's no lead pastor, I twitched a little bit. I confess. Honestly, it's the
give me chapter and verse on lead pastor.
Well, no, but it's the thing of
He just twitched again.
He said, next question.
There's only one chief shepherd. His name is
Yes.
Jesus. That's the only.
So let's unpack this and let's break it down. At a biblical level, what's a challenge? Where does microsite struggle, or does it not? Is there anything that a microsite cannot be that the Bible calls us to be?
Here's what I think. It can easily be less than, like, there's, okay, if I had a whiteboard and draw this, like, okay, at this end of imagine a funnel, okay? At this end of the funnel, when it's widest, I think 100% of God's people are called to be missionaries and disciple makers. That's your birthright as a child of God. Then the funnel gets a little smaller. Within that group, there's a smaller number that are able to lead a team of people or a group of people. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Right? And then within that group of people that can lead a group or a team, there's a smaller number that can lead what I would call a church. And then there's different models of church. If you're leading a microchurch, there's tons of people can lead that. But now if you're going to get to like the prevailing traditional model, now suddenly your funnel is getting like very, very small. So what I'm saying is, if my biblical ecclesiology, like, I think the strongest case is the definition I've already given. Like, if you look at what the church was in the New Testament reality, like from the best historical data and also in terms of like just biblical studies, most of the churches in the New Testament are probably 20 to 70 people that were an oikos, a network that was converted basically to a church. And they continued to meet like in their homes, and they became like little networks of these home churches in a city. Now, when the church could bring everyone together like they could in Jerusalem, they would, and then Paul rented the hall of what, Tyrannus, I think it was, right? And brought people together. So I'm all for the public gatherings. And we actually have a space for public gatherings, even in the underground, where we bring microchurches together as kind of a congregation to meet together. But if you have to get down to like, what is the essential ecclesiology? To me, it's like, it's a spiritual extended family that's led by what the Bible calls elders. And Paul didn't set up lead pastors. He set up teams of elders in cities, right? It was a plurality of leadership. And then there's the other layer of deacons that came in with the Church of Jerusalem. Those are pretty much the only offices. So for me, it's not a church if there's no eldership. Like, to me, it's like it's a great Christian group, but if you're not under any eldership somewhere, then you've chosen not to really be under the full headship of Jesus. Because, like, to me, it's like you see elders and deacons. So for it to be a microchurch, in my mind, you have to be practicing community, mission, and worship. And we all kind of know the main passages for those: Great Commandment, Great Commission, right? But then you also have to have those offices in place somewhere. Now, that doesn't mean every microchurch has to have its own circle of elders, right? But over this network of microchurches, there are elders providing oversight.
You just alluded to elders, deacons over a network. And I'm just curious, it's not even on my list of questions, but what does a network look like compared to like a one-off? Like, what's the stability of something, of a family doing it versus creating a larger, theologically backed network of house churches that are running? Like, give me a pros and cons kind of both.
Well, I just think if you're one-off, you're completely vulnerable. It's not going to be sustainable. It's unbiblical because you're not connected to any eldership. I think the Bible clearly teaches that. The way that we're doing it right now, this first year of the underground, again, we're still an infant. Okay, so, but we decided the first year we're just going to do like one hub, and we're going to support and create multiple networks of microchurches.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like one network that's forming in Shawnee, and one that's up in Piper and Bonner, and then another one that's forming in Overland Park and Olathe. Like we have these networks of microchurches that are forming. So we just started a task force that's going to do elder training, so that like probably the middle of next year, we'll have elders for each one of these networks. And then we'll formalize that, and we're going to call them collectives.
Okay.
So a collective is a network of at least 4 or 5 microchurches, and they have eldership. They will have ownership of kind of like sustaining themselves and replicating themselves, all the signs of maturity kind of thing. They will choose to gather as much as they want. Some of the networks might say, we want to meet with all the microchurches once a month. Others might say, you know what, we're going to meet every week. And we'll leave that up to the elders in those regions.
So you've been talking about this. You've got this leader. You've got this person in your funnel. You're driving them deeper in, and you want them to be the pastor of your house church. You use the term campus pastor for your microsites. Like, how do you prepare someone? How do you grow someone to the point where they're spiritually mature enough to shepherd, to lead, to guide house church of 30, 50, 100 people?
So we do a one-on-one teaching basis. So the first couple that we launched our first 2 microsites with, I trained them for a while, about 6 months, going over a lot of the stuff that we cover in our discipleship groups, like Rooted, things like that. Spiritual rhythms, spiritual disciplines that they're going to need in order to pastor these people. And then from then on out, they have served as pretty much the gold standard and the trainers. So whenever we launch a new one, we kind of send them to that microsite to like shadow these people for a while before we launch those out. But there's no, like, how many of you guys went to Christian college? Yeah, how many of you really were prepared to do ministry when you got to your first church? Like, you don't know how to do ministry until you do ministry. And so we are comfortable with empowering people to use the gifts God's given them, realizing that there might be some failures, but the pros outweigh the cons in that every time for us.
For us, we've got like a suite of tools and training that go from informal to formal. And our hub, basically, you've got that personal discovery calling team that helps you discover your calling, do kind of a deep dive on your own spiritual, emotional, relational health. You get spiritual direction, soul care that's provided. We have a startup coaching team that meets with new potential leaders to help them basically put together their business plan for their new kingdom initiative. We have an ongoing coaching team that helps to optimize the ongoing microchurches. And then we also, I'll let you go ahead and talk about, we have what we call intentional disciple making environments, which is actually kind of overall, it would take you 3 years to go through this training, but like Tyler said, it's on the job training. It's not like you're doing this all beforehand and then when you're finished with this, you'll go, it's like, no, you're doing this along the way. So why don't you talk about the IDEs?
IDE, basically I created a couple of things. Westside was really good at reaching the lost and equally good at losing the found, if that makes sense. We could get a lot of folks there, but we could help seekers become believers, but we weren't systematically helping believers become followers and followers become influencers. And so it created a couple of experiences to do that. I'll unpack those in just a minute. But at one point I was asked, you can't take the tools, Brian, that you've created into a third world environment where we're doing some of our global work. So what are the irreducible minimums? And out of that has come our language for intentional disciple making environment. And it's really 3 phrases that summarize it all. Well, the first one is outcome focused. We're relentlessly focused on the outcomes. And what are the outcomes? If you recall, character and calling. So we're always revisiting. How are we doing? Are you more loving and joyful, peaceful? How's the calling going, the development going? Not just determining what your gifts are, but your area of passion is, and serve in that area of passion with your gifts. So we're relentlessly focused on those 2 things. So it's outcome focused. It's habit fueled. Habit fueled. It's not content fueled. Learning things doesn't make you different. It just helps you realize the gap between where you could be and where you are, which is a problem, right? I can't go to a CrossFit gym, open up their manual and read it and get more fit. But for whatever reason, we've allowed content to kind of remain king inside the church, thinking that if we deliver the information, the practical applications will be made and the outcomes will be accomplished. I think that that's not working. Okay.
Exclamation point.
Here, here.
So it's outcome focused and it's habit fueled. And what's important is to marry the habits to the outcomes. I don't want to go to a CrossFit gym, as I can demonstrate without any further investigative research on that, right? But there have been seasons of my life where the outcome of a more fit body got me into the gym and will get me back because it tastes good when you get going. So what if we did tie the spiritual habits to the spiritual outcomes that help you get there? And everybody gets it. You know, if you want the reps, if you want the abs, you got to do the reps. And it's the same thing with spiritual formation. Somehow the enemy has tricked us into believing that the habits are about legalism. Like, it couldn't be further from the truth. Outcome focused, habit fueled, and then content flavored. The content is adjusted based upon where they are in their spiritual formation. You don't teach systematic theology to folks that are searching for Jesus. But you don't teach Craig Rochelle's same 6-week thing for people that are wanting to really grow, if that makes sense. There's content that can serve folks at different areas of formation. So that's our IDE. That's our intentional disciple-making environment. And we have one that's 6 months long that basically reorients people around the missional rhythms of dependence upon the Spirit to actually change in character and calling. It's called Followers Made. Folks that have done that, and you have to be serving somewhere in Jesus' name to actually get into these things. And it's a high bar, exclusive invitation, limited duration. What are some of the other dynamics that are unusual about Followers
Well,
Made?
the length of it. Most people are shocked that you can get someone to do 6 months.
Yeah.
And then everyone in it, it's built on shared leadership. So not only are you learning to be a disciple, by the end of it, you're ready to make disciples. Yeah. And we average
30%.
Yeah, 30% reproduction rate. 30% of the people that go through Followers Made end up actually making new disciples.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is crazy.
And another distinctive of it is we encourage groups of up to 12 because Jesus kind of modeled that. And then we break the group, we subdivide the groups into triads. And it's all done all at the same time. And our technology that we delivered, we actually are a tech company that depends on tech. We deliver these experiences in a way where you're actually reading the scripture like YouVersion in our app. You're actually journaling an I believe in an I will statement, like what did I learn and what am I going to do about it within the app. And you have 2 other people in the group of 12, of up to 12, that are actually seeing your journals and holding you accountable to them. Wow. So it's not just the frequency of the journaling that you're required to keep up with, it's the actual actions that Jesus led you to in that app. So Followers Made, there's a 10.5-month Leaders Made that optimizes spiritual influence and spiritual leadership, servant leadership. And then we have one called Missionaries Made, which takes those folks that are already mature in Christ, either after Followers Made or after Leaders Made, typically, not all the time, that helps people really deep dive into the blessed rhythms, where they're fully engaged with their neighbors and God is creating spiritual activity in and through them in their area. And then Microchurch Learning Community is a 12-month process that helps you actually move from just having that spiritual activity into more organized and trained into the whole system that lends to a network of houses and hubs.
So you've got Disciples Made. That's the 6-month one. That's the initial one, right?
Disciples Made is the umbrella that all 4 of those.
Okay, so which is, well, I'm sorry, what's that first one called?
Followers Made.
Followers Made. All right, so Followers Made is that first bucket,
Right.
the 6 month. Like, what percentage of people that are involved in any given house church, micro-location, go through Followers Made?
Well, again, we have this, back to that suite of tools, we have informal tools, which are things like, we have a set of 11 different shapes or symbols that are each around a key area of life. And it's the kind of thing where you can share them in 2 minutes with somebody. or you could have a 2-hour conversation about it, or we have discovery Bible studies where you could spend 6 weeks on it. We train all of our microchurch leaders on how to use all those tools, because they typically end up starting by using these informal tools. Then we teach people how to do discovery Bible study, which is a very simple way of engaging the scripture as a community. That's it bakes in obedience, it bakes in reproduction. So we teach people how to do discovery Bible study, and then we have these follower made, leaders made. So we're under a year old. We have just launched like 1 new followers made, 1 new leaders made, a new missionaries made, and a new microchurch learning community. So right now there's 4 of those operating, but it's just the first round.
Okay.
Like all previous to this.
It's not the first round for Disciples Made stuff.
No,
No.
but in the
guys-
underground it is.
In Disciples Made, I mean, you guys are in New Spring Church, you're like lots of other,
One of their
Restore.
About 40 or 50 churches so far. We're very young, very small, but about over 5,000 people have come through these experiences.
So you've got tools that, cold to hot. Maybe you've got some of the more organic 2 minutes, 2 hours type of things to get someone who's maybe cold to Christ or cold to the idea, and warm them up into the process, and eventually get them in a more rich pipeline of followers made and others to roll.
Yeah. Like we would tell people, it's probably going to be at least 12 to 24 months.
Yeah.
Before you actually see a really sustainable, extended spiritual family in your community. And that's at the point where you can start looking and going, okay, maybe I'll start a followers made with my microchurch. Right. You know what I mean?
And so it's interesting. You got 2 different paradigms here, and I don't want to tug on the thread too hard, but 12 to 24 months over here with followers made. I know Rooted is probably 10 to 12 weeks. And there's obviously strengths and weaknesses in both models and challenges to overcome. But what's interesting is both of them have a pathway to go through to create an intentional disciple model.
Well, there is a common denominator with all
Go
of
for it.
this. It's their discipleship strategy is not one and done. It's coaching on top of just-in-time training.
Yeah.
Just-in-time training. I love that. That's good.
Cool. Yeah.
Tyler, or Jeff, you mentioned the Rooted. Tyler, did you guys use that to help build leaders up and to prepare them for that? Is that kind of part of that training?
I'll give like a 2 or 3 minute.
So initially, no, because we started Church Anywhere before we started doing Rooted as a church. So we're 2.5 years into Church Anywhere at this point. We started Rooted about 1.5 years ago. So now that's the funnel. Before it was like I said, the one-on-one teaching, the one-on-one, hey, come along with me to a hospital call, that kind of deal. But now we have a much better like funnel. When we started it, like nobody else was doing that, so we had no idea what we were doing. David Ertzi yesterday said it was like the Wild West. We're really like shooting whatever just to see what happens, and that's kind of how we did it. So we knew we wanted to push our people to be the church. We just didn't have a great strategy to make those disciple leaders yet, and now we do. So we've been doing Rooted now for about 1.5 years or so.
It's interesting. I just had a conversation with a church leader out in Spokane. He's a New Thing Network leader out there, and they use Rooted too as the front end of their kind of discipleship pathway. And they're about to adopt Missionaries Made as like the phase 2 part. Because that's like a 4-month.
As he was saying that, I was like, man, that could marry together so well.
I was like, I think it seems like they'll actually really complement.
We just worked with Rooted to develop an app as well. So we piloted the first online Rooted group. And so through that, they developed an app where everything was like right on there, where you can have community within it. You can read the material, you can stay connected, that kind of deal.
Sounds like hauntingly familiar.
Yeah.
Seriously, there's a lot of shared.
How we did it before was so scattered because we would use like Zoom, Marco Polo, and Facebook, and all that stuff. But now it's all in one place. So
Yeah, one of the things that I hope you guys are noticing is that the conversation that we were having about church online 5-10 years ago was about the Sunday service, but a lot of the new tools that you're seeing and what people are putting their energy toward is the more important discipleship stuff that's happening. And the tech that we need to make the discipleship work.
The online ministry that we do, the Sunday service is such a small portion of that.
Right.
That's when I come to this conference, I have to get my mind back around like, okay, we need to focus on the Sunday service because I spend so much of my like week not focusing on the Sunday service and doing ministry in other ways.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's a side conversation.
Sorry.
I don't know that I want to get lost on the Sunday
No.
service either.
No.
So somebody out there is thinking about doing this. Like, how do they get started? What do they need to do? They probably need to have a conversation with leadership. How's that go? Like, what next step for somebody out there who's interested in micro locations? What does that look like?
If you're thinking about microchurch, Brian Sanders he leads the Underground Network, which is a larger network we're a part of. He just released a new book. It's called Microchurches, A Smaller Way. I would read that book as a leadership team because I think it's the best thing I've seen out there. And then more importantly, I would ask you to think about how you can be a better missionary where God has already sent you. So like when I'm talking with church leaders, I'll walk through the bus rhythms and say, really the best thing you could do is like spend 6 months actually really trying to live these rhythms deeply in one context and watch what Jesus does in your own life. You know, I would start there.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how it's one thing to talk about doing this type of ministry in theory. It's another thing to actually, even though I'm the facilitator of all of Church Anywhere within our context, like it has changed my life. Like we have a 17-year-old daughter now because of Church Anywhere. And so I can't stress enough that like
Adopted.
Yeah, you have to be a part of it. Like you have to allow God to take your calling and do the same thing. And so start there. So even if you haven't had that conversation with leadership yet and you're still tossing this around, nothing is stopping you from going out and being a missionary in your neighborhood or in the local school system or wherever you're passionate about.
Amen.
With us, the quick answer to us is, we would actually, if you're interested in using Disciples Made's more formal tools like we were talking about, we actually encourage you to start small. We don't want to go big. We encourage you to start with one pilot group and let those stories invite other people, because it is a different way that does create tensions over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would invite you to do it more small with leadership. But I can give you a little poker chip we have. That's my business card. And we've got videos on there that kind of unpack the IDE, followers made, leaders made, that you can share with leadership. If nothing else, just to help turn the dial more in the direction that we've discussed today.
Yes, sir. You had one as well.
So, my church that I came from had tried to launch Mission of Communities a couple of years back. And I've heard all four of you talk about these Mission of Communities as micro expressions. It's typically people who are focusing a majority of their time and effort being a part of that community. So are the members of these micro churches also members and largely committed to macro expressions of the church? Or are they committing their time and their family specifically to these microsites?
So ours are. So our
They're doing both.
Yeah, and our microsites would consider themselves part of First Capital Christian Church. For example, there's an inmate at Branchville Correctional Facility named Jerry who sends us a $10 check every single month because he believes he should be tithing to his church. And that's not an uncommon thing for us. So they feel part of our family. So it really is like an extension of what we do in the building, but that's just being the church outside of the building.
With Kansas City Underground, most of the people in the microchurch would see that as their primary church. Some of them, though, are also connected to other congregations. So we have like various partnerships in the city. Like there's a large church in our city called Heartland, probably a church of about 3,000. And they have freed up a staff person to help develop microchurch leaders in their congregation. So they see their congregation and their church as the hub, and they want to build out the equipping teams, and they're a part of the underground. So right now we're providing all those services for their people while they raise up their first round of microchurch leaders, and then over time can build their own equiping teams.
It has to be a philosophy shift because we would consider ourselves, we wouldn't say the hub, but our church vision has shifted to function in a way of like our church is the hub.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the leadership can't make that shift, there's going to be some serious tension. And you're going to get into some problems of, well, these people are leaving, but they're not doing actual church, doing house church, that kind of deal.
Yeah. Do you feel like, though, that an implementation of this philosophy can fail if you try and have 2 feet in both these camps at the same time? That we're going to be, our leadership and our vision is going to be up about macro church. And
The thing I love about First Capital, Church Anywhere, is the vision is intricately tied to it.
That's what
And they are reaching people that are not coming to the building. And so I think if your audience overlaps, that's where you're going to have problems, because it's the same thing with church online, where church online is allegedly taking people out of the pews. Find another audience, find the strategy place where it makes sense, and allow both to complement and help each other instead of constantly fighting and conflicting and robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Without that ministry philosophy shift,
Yeah.
there will be tension.
Which is in the leadership, not
Right,
just the audience.
And so that's, and I know
Overall
and I've had
vision.
conversations with some of you guys who are really considering this. It's a leadership, it's a strategy decision. If you're just rolling dice and launching something without having that strategy buy-in, it's not going to work. There's going to be too much tension. There's going to be too much, I'm taken away from this. I don't want to give it the attention. There's some philosophical shifts for this to be done well that need to happen, and that leadership has to have strong buy-in for it.
Yeah, my experience having helped 2 churches transition, and then like that, I was personally on the leadership team and then I've helped literally hundreds of other churches with this, is if you're trying to make attractional and missional equal, you can't do it. Attractional requires a certain strategy, missional requires a certain strategy. Sometimes they are literally cross-current, and that's just the reality of it. So you have to decide which is going to be the major. And I think you can decide either one. You can say, we're going to be primarily attractional, but we're going to create some space over here for R&D to do some great missional things. Or you have to say, no, really, we're attractional for missional, so now we're going to restructure so that this is the primary and the attractional supports it, which is what I think you guys have done.
Well, the byproduct of making it missional is the attractional part of what we do is our people, not necessarily like what we put on the stage. So
I
it's
guess
still attractional,
You
just in a
can't
different
ask
way.
people to serve on the weekend in children's ministry and then go launch these mission leaders.
You can't, there's not enough time.
But you can leverage those volunteer positions as incubators for
Yep.
developing people's personal calling. We actually created a measurable on our data sheet for the First Impressions team. Like we had 230 volunteers or so at any given time. We had a line item in our measurables every year. How many people did we graduate out to a better step of personal calling? Like they went from being just people that came to people that served. That's a smaller pool. If there's people that serve, how do we help develop them and influence in that area and disciple them, and then disciple them out?
So one of our
You're always
microsites,
pulling in.
one of our microsites is at an elementary school, and the lady started she's a teacher, but she started serving in our church in the elementary department, like the kids department. But when we released people 2 years ago to like go out and be empowered to be the church, we've cultivated this passion within her for elementary kids for years. And so it was natural for her to step into the role of volunteer campus pastor for an elementary campus of 100 kids.
I'm fortunate enough to have leadership behind me as far as doing micro-location. The concern is the general attendance and getting the rest of the congregation on board. Did you guys have any pushback on that? And if you did, how did you guys navigate that?
Yeah, we had some, but we shifted. Like I said, we shifted our entire vision of the entire church. So you're obviously gonna have some pushback with that. We knew we would take some lumps, but as people started to see results, and so part of the thing we do is we'll videotape baptisms, like at the other site. When you start showing that stuff on the weekend of like, hey, this is so and so from 2 hours away, and these people we sent out to be pastors just baptized them. Check this out, like. People start to change the way they feel about things pretty quickly.
There's a transition bell curve that saved my soul. I mean, Jesus, and then the transition bell curve. Because it helps you see, and this is a sociological proven thing that's in businesses. Anytime you bring change into an organization, you've got the innovators, you've got the early adopters, you've got the early majority, the late majority, and then the laggards, and there's percentages of people. And here's what I've learned. It's the stories of the innovators that attract the early adopters. It's the story of the early adopters that gain the trust of the early majority, and so forth. And then the last 16%, the laggards, they never come. And so there will always be pushback. There'll always be 16% pushback, regardless.
Yeah.
For as long as you do it, until they're gone.
And if you disciple right, you're well beyond that 16%.
If you disciple right, like that's why we actually say start small and let the stories of the first group or 2 or 3 start to leaven in the flour. It just grows over time.
So for us, that 16% pushback became very quickly outweighed by the like 103% life change compared to in person.
But you can Google that bell curve and see those stats, and it's so helpful.
We're going to break the podcast right there. Many of you guys are considering this shift to a micro location, and having done them, it is a very exciting part of ministry, and the ability that we have to impact, to disciple, to help people grow deeper in their faith, even using online to create a virtual network of discipleship across the country and around the world. Man, it's just awesome. And I pray for churches today, and I've been encouraged more and more as more and more churches are realizing that church online needs to replicate itself in physical areas. And they're using this idea of the micro model really to kind of start to foster and grow these micro locations all around the country. And so it is happening. It is a model, and we will see it continue to grow and prayerfully succeed. But this idea of getting leadership on board is so key. And I just wanted to reiterate here right now with y'all. As you're developing these plans, a philosophical shift like a micro location is definitely something that your leadership, that your senior pastor, that your elders, whatever your structure is at your church, they need to understand and catch the vision of. There are some things in church online where, I've had pastors tell me in the past, I don't care what you're doing, Jeff, just go out there and just make it happen. That's awesome. I trust you intricately. The idea of a micro location is not something that you can just get a free pass on. But in finding that strategy where you can reach out and impact people through the micro location that isn't impacting your physical campus locations, or fine tuning it in such a way that both can coexist. That's where you're going to see the physical church is going to understand the most of what church online can give you, where you're not just impacting the local areas in your town, but you're expanding your church's reach far beyond the 15, 20 miles around your building to where God leads you and where the Holy Spirit can direct you. Micro locations goes a step further and takes the lid off of the church. And all of a sudden you can see yourself spread in a richer, deeper, and further way. And we discussed in many ways in this podcast why micro locations can help the church. And there's certainly more that we'll be talking about soon. Well, it's been a great podcast. We've loved being here with you guys, and we look forward to seeing you again soon here at the Church Digital Podcast. You all have a good day.